Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. Today on the podcast, I'm speaking with Brooke, whose story could be one that movies are made of. She has experienced loss after loss, culminating in a series of devastating and traumatic losses within the past 12 months. Listening to Brooke telling her story is both devastating and shocking, at the same time as hope-inspiring in the way she's living her life after loss with fierce resilience at the same time as grieving. She speaks candidly about the dark places she went through while grieving and how she got help when she was suicidal. The truth is that there are people like Brooke who have no choice than to live with multiple traumatic losses. The question is, how do we meet them? How do we enable ourselves to hold space for someone in their situation? Regarding the people who helped Brooke the most, she says,
I want to be strong and I want to keep going and I want to find meaning in things and I'm just like a go person. And the most helpful thing for me was people saying, like, slow down and breathe. Like, you need to feel this and not rush through it, not ignore it, not medicate it.
About this week's guest, Brooke Carlock has experienced more grief and loss in her lifetime than most. The death of her grandparents, sister, cousin, and sister-in-law before she turned 35, along with her extensive coursework in human development and psychology, taught her the power of resilience. However, nothing would prepare her for the devastation to come in her 40s. In a span of 4 months, Brooke lost her father to an unexpected heart attack, her stepmother to suicide, and her beloved 10-year-old daughter Libby in a horrific car accident. As a teacher and freelance writer, her daughter's death led Brooke to relentlessly study the field of grief, loss, trauma, and resilience in order to survive her own experiences. Currently, she is pursuing her grief educator certification. Brooke is the founder of livelikeLibby.org, a non-profit organization that provides dance scholarships in her daughter's honor, as well as the creator of Grieving Mommy, where she blogs about her experiences as a grieving mother. I hope you find today's episode as valuable as I have my conversation with Brooke. Take care. So welcome, Brooke. Thank you so much for taking time today to speak to me and be my guest on my podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to be here and share my story and see if I can help anyone else out there to feel normal who's grieving.
So as we start all of our podcasts is by you telling us a little bit about your story of loss and trauma and just share how you traveled through all of those.
All right. Well, I started living with loss at an early age. My grandfather, who I was really close to, he lived next door to me when I was growing up. He died when I was 10, and we actually had his funeral on my 10th birthday. And I've since lost all of my grandparents, but I was definitely the closest with him. So that's kind of the first memory I have of really being affected by grief. And then kind of fast forward a little bit, when I was 24, my sister Shannon died in her sleep. She was only 32. I'd actually talked to her the night before she died on the phone, and she had a cold and she sounded congested. She had gone to the doctor, but it was right before Christmas. She was planning a Christmas Eve dinner with my dad and stepmom and was excited about that. And, I said, take care of yourself. I love you. And we hung up. And then in the middle of the night, I got a phone call from her husband saying that he couldn't wake her up. And by that point, it was too late for me to do anything. I was actually, her 5-year-old daughter had tried to wake her up in the middle of the night and she didn't wake up. Her lungs had filled with fluid and she died in her sleep.
Wow. So
I guess she left behind a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And that was really my first, other than my grandfather, that was really the first huge loss that I had suffered. People kind of expect grandparents to die, but you don't expect your otherwise, perfectly healthy 32-year-old sister.
How old were you at the time?
I was 24.
Okay.
So
Yeah, you mentioned
there
that
was
before. That's true.
a little bit of an age gap between us, but yeah, she was a great big sister. And I think it was the most upsetting for me because, I had been off at college and, had come back and we had just started to kind of like rekindle that sisterly relationship. And I had had my first son and, our kids, we'd get together with the kids and play. And I was kind of looking forward to sharing them growing up together. And then, yeah, it was just that. And it was so unexpected. It just kind of shocked everyone in our family. So, unfortunately, that wasn't the last thing that I had experienced. Through the rest of my 20s and 30s, I had several other people die that were important to me. My cousin died of cancer. And then my sister-in-law, who I was very close with, my brother's wife, she had a very long illness and he spent a long time trying to take care of her and fighting for her. And she ended up dying of brain cancer in the end. So that was really hard as well. So they were all devastating and they kind of gave me that basis of dealing with grief. But I say like nothing could have prepared me for this past year that I've had. It was almost a year ago, November of 2021. I received a call again in the middle of the night. And I seem to be the person that people call when this stuff happens. I received a call from my stepmom that my dad had died. He was driving home from work and had a heart attack. And I think he knew something was wrong because he had pulled to the side of the highway. But then he had passed away before he had the chance to call anyone for help. And people reported the car on the side of the road and the police found him and identified him. But that was more than devastating for me.
And you said that was November last year, so that's not even a year ago. As of recording this, that's not even a year.
Not even a year, yeah. And my parents were divorced when I was growing up, and it was kind of a contentious, like difficult divorce. And a lot of times I was the go-between between my mom and my dad. But I was always kind of like a daddy's girl. and I still, it was just a shock because I'd had dinner with him just a few days before he died, and he was fine, laughing, joking, being his larger than life self. And to me, he was like Superman. If you knew my dad, he was 6'5" and 300 pounds and just very like dominating. If he was in a room, like your attention just went to him automatically, just his big booming laugh. And he was wonderful, but he kind of commanded the room and kind of commanded your attention. And like I said, larger than life. And the fact that he could have such a humble end as just dying in a car by himself on the side of the road, that was really hard for me to just comprehend that happens. And unfortunately, I feel like I didn't really get the chance to properly grieve that. My stepmother had her own health problems, and she was pretty reliant on my dad. And so she was a mess. And I'd helped her make all of the arrangements for the funeral. And then the day of my dad's funeral, I got there early because I was helping with everything. And I was waiting around for a long time, wondering where my stepmom was because she was supposed to be there and she didn't show up. And then right before the funeral was about to start, the funeral director came out and told me that I had a phone call, and it was my stepmom's brother. He had gone by the house to pick her up to come to the funeral and found her unconscious, and she had overdosed on pills and alcohol. And yeah. So I had to spend my dad's funeral telling everyone what had happened to my stepmom. So that was really hard because I was kind of put into that place of, people were expecting to see her, and there was a lot of people that I didn't know. And I had to kind of step up and be the person who was greeting everyone and, keeping everything running and all those things that happen, when there's a funeral. And I was kind of resentful of that because I wanted to be able to grieve my dad, but instead it was kind of thrust into this position that I wasn't really expecting. So yeah, my stepmom died. They took her to the hospital, but she died at the hospital. And so she died within 10 days of my dad dying. And then I had to plan another funeral. I helped her brother plan all of her arrangements. And then just a couple days later, we ended up having the funeral for my stepmom right after my dad. And for anyone, that would have been a lot, but it doesn't end there, unfortunately. So while I was grieving my dad's death and my stepmom's death from November, in December, I found out that my mom had pancreatic cancer, and it was in late stages, and that she probably wouldn't make it very long. She's still alive, and she's still fighting it and doing chemo and radiation and going through treatment. But that was like another blow, especially right after losing my dad. It was like, great, so now I'm going to lose my mom and my dad and have no parents left. And then still, as if that wasn't enough, 2 months after that, that was when my entire world literally came crashing down. I think what I went through was enough for one person to handle, but the worst was yet to come. So it was in February 9th. I had dropped my daughter Libby off at her dance class around 4 p.m. And we did our usual routine that we did when I dropped her off. And she hopped out of the car, ran to the door of the dance studio, and turned around and blew me a kiss. And I blew her a kiss back. And that was the last time that I ever saw her. My second husband and I went out to run errands. My children's father and I divorced in 2019. And the kids went with him every Wednesday, and then every other weekend they stayed over with him. So it was a Wednesday night. And my son, Max, who's 19, he was supposed to pick up Libby at dance and drive them both to their dad's house for the evening. My other son, Grayson, was working that night, so he wasn't in the car. So my second husband and I were in the car running errands, and it was about 6:30 p.m. And my phone rang, and I saw that it was my ex-husband, David, my children's dad. So I answered, and this is the kind of phone call that you will never forget ever in your life. So David, the kid's dad, he was crying on the other end, like screaming and crying. And it was nothing like I had ever heard before. And I will never get that sound out of my head. And the best way I can think of to describe it, how it felt, was like, kind of like my spine turned to ice. It was like icy fingers just, going down my spine, and my whole body turned cold and tingly because I could just tell without him even saying anything, just hearing him crying on the other end of the phone. Like I knew it was bad. And I kept saying to him, David, what's wrong? What's wrong? Because he was just sort of like screaming and crying and wasn't saying anything. And then he managed to get out the words that he said the kids were in an accident. And then he said, I think they're dead. Wow. And he told me that he had to go. And he hung up the phone and left me like that. And I'm like, what? At that point, I couldn't even, it was like everything had shut down. Like it was almost impossible to function at that point. I'm just like, what just happened? So I called him back. And he said, I'm sorry I hung up. I'm sorry I hung up. At the time, he was actually on the phone with the kids when the accident happened. My son was having problems with his car. And he had called my ex-husband and said, like, what should I do? My engine light's on, what, you know. And my ex-husband had told him to pull into a sort of market that was coming up. And my son, we found out later, just he must have been like really nervous about the car. He just wasn't paying attention. And he went through the intersection trying to get to that place. And there was a car carrier truck that hit right on Libby's side. So my ex-husband heard it happen because he was still on the phone. And that's why he was hysterical. He wasn't even positive what had happened. He just heard it, and then the phone went dead. And so he had called me right away screaming. When I called him back, he told me to go to an intersection that I knew well. It was on the way to his house. And I will never forget that car ride. I just remember, like, I knew it was true. Like, I knew it was bad. And in my gut, I just somehow knew that I didn't know which one of them or both, but I knew that one of my children was dead. And I just remember rocking back and forth saying, no, 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 no. Like, I couldn't say anything but no. So my husband at the time, my second husband, we just raced to the scene, and we got there. David was already there. When I got there, I hopped out of the car and I ran over to him. He was standing with a police officer, and then I looked and I saw my son's car, and it was completely smashed on my daughter's side. And I knew that she was gone, and they had a white sheet pulled over it so that we couldn't really see in the window or anything. And when I went over to my ex-husband, he looked at me and said, she's dead.
Take a moment.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot. And I'm just gauging from my experience of listening to you that a lot of listeners will also be really intensely feeling that with you. Yeah. And still, you're sitting here with me. Yeah. So I want to just acknowledge you for just being here and having the space to tell your story, because I think a lot of time grieving parents, they get feedback verbally or non-verbally that their story is too much. Yeah. Because it is a lot for people to listen already, let alone you as the mother, as the sister, as the daughter, to be going through loss in succession, but also the trauma.
Yeah. I hadn't really experienced trauma, I would say, before. I mean, my sister's death and my dad's death, they were heartbreaking, but it was not like my daughter. That was different. And I just have all of the memories of that night, you know, seeing the car, and, you know, after David told me that she was dead, I just fell on the ground, just sobbing. My son, Max, who was driving the car, he was unconscious when the paramedics got there. But they were able to revive him before I got there. But he was in bad shape and had a head injury. So they had actually taken him by ambulance before I even got there. So I didn't get to see him. And at that point, we didn't know whether he was going to make it or not. We didn't know the extent of his injuries other than he had a head injury, and that they had to, you know, rush him to the hospital. At the scene, they have to ask you a million questions, and you don't want to answer any questions, but somehow you just sort of, it was almost like I was in a daze, you know, it's like you're in this Twilight world and you just answer their questions. And I tried to walk towards the car. And I just remember a bunch of hands stopping me from trying to walk to the car. and they told me that I didn't want to see what was there. They just said, no, like, don't look, because you don't want to see it. And I later found out that David, when he had gotten to the scene, they actually had to tackle him to the ground because he tried to get to Libby in the car. But she was already, gone when the paramedics got there. So both of us, they just were kind of holding us back, saying like, no, like, go. They told us it's going to be a while before anything is wrapped up here. So go to the hospital to your son because your son needs you. So that's what we did. So we went.
Can I ask a question there?
Of course.
I mean, how was it for you not to be able to see your daughter? I mean, I'm assuming those people who come to the scene and are skilled to be there, they know the traumatization that can happen and leading to post-traumatic stress for parents. And yet, you and your ex-husband, the only thing that you want is to connect to your child. How was that at that time, and how did you deal with not being able to see her?
I understood what they were saying, but I feel like there's still that innate instinct as a mom to still want to go to her. You know what I mean? You just, she was hurt and I knew she was dead, but it's just, you want to go and hold her and take care of her. So honestly, I mean, if I'm being honest, that's my trauma. That is where my trauma comes from not being able to see her. And I know that it must have been terrible because they wouldn't let us see her at the scene. They wouldn't let us see any of the photos of the scene. They wouldn't even let us see her at the funeral home.
Okay.
Because before she was cremated, and they all just kept saying, like, you don't want that picture in your head. Like, remember your daughter the way she was. But they said just mentally, you do not want, it's not going to look like your daughter.
Yeah.
And so my trauma and like my post-traumatic stress is that because I didn't know what she looked like, it is like my brain comes up with its own pictures.
Yeah.
And so I really struggle still today with wondering what she was thinking, if she knew she was about to get hit, like how long. No one can tell me how long she was alive. Was it instantaneous or was she alive for a little bit, and was she scared? And as a mom, that's the most heartbreaking thing. Like, I know she died in a car accident. I know that they said that she was dead on arrival, but I don't know the details. And so my brain
is trying to figure it out.
Tries its darndest. And I don't want those pictures. I don't want to know. You know what I mean? I really don't want to know, but that's just what the brain does. It tries to fill in those blanks that I don't know.
And to put that into perspective of time for the listeners, this is 8 months after her death. So I also want to normalize that this is the brain's natural way of trying to figure it out and putting pictures where they are none and thinking about how could it happen, what could I have done, could I have been helpful, I would have wanted to be there. But how did you then deal with that in those 8 months since then?
Well, I can tell you one thing that I think really helped at the beginning. I mean, the night of, if I can kind of go back there, having to go to the hospital and help Max, that helped me immensely because it gave me something to focus on. We got to his room, and like I said, he had a head injury. He needed stitches, and he was kind of covered in blood. And I remember thinking, like, I didn't know if it was his blood or Libby's blood. I just kept looking at the blood, like trying to figure out what was his and what wasn't. But the mind, talking about my mind and filling in the gaps, the mind is truly incredible. He didn't remember anything about the accident. we got there, he was awake, but his brain from its injury was on almost like a 30-second memory delay. So it was terrifying, but fascinating all at once, because we'd tell him something and he'd remember it for about 30 seconds. And then it was like he just went blank. And then he would start all over again. Where am I? Why am I here? So he kept saying, where am I? What happens? And we'd tell him. And then 30 seconds later, he'd forget. And we'd have to tell him again. And this went on for hours in the hospital, to the point where we actually were kind of like joking around. Like, we'd tell him stuff and be like, don't worry, you're going to forget it in 30 seconds anyway. And just having that to focus on. And then, when we brought him home from the hospital, just taking care of his injuries and everything, that alleviated, I think, some of that immediate trauma that I was going through.
Were you able to take him home pretty quickly, or was he discharged?
We were able to take him home by the next morning.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. He had a very bad concussion, and eventually the 30-second delay ended, but he still is not able to remember anything that happened with the accident.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing in my mind. I'm kind of glad that is like that. So no permanent damage other than some scars on his end, which I am grateful for. But then he also has the scars of dealing with the fact that he was driving the car when his sister died. So he's definitely in therapy. And we all went. The police and the people who were at the accident, they connected us immediately with trauma therapists. So that helped, because I did that. That was kind of how I dealt with that trauma, was going to therapy, just learning ways to kind of redirect my thoughts. For me personally, and I've talked about this on my website and with my blog and things, my coping mechanism is learning. And I've always been like a book person and a nerd, and I'm a teacher, and I just enjoy learning things. And I started studying grief like it was my job. And I read every book that I could possibly find, and I looked at all of the websites and listened to all the podcasts and watched all the videos I possibly could. And I think that is the biggest thing that helped me survive those early days. It gave me something to focus on. It gave me something to do. And it sort of gave me an outlet, because I started writing myself, and made me feel like I wasn't losing my mind. I think it was because I had read so much, I kind of knew what to expect. So all of those overwhelming feelings where you feel like you're out of control, or you feel, you're having all these feelings, and it was just like, okay, this is normal. Like, everyone said this is going to happen. So that was how I got through it. But honestly, I had very, very dark points, which I know again is normal. But I feel like I was lucky because I had studied so much. About a month after Libby died, at the beginning you're kind of in shock, and you're going through all the, planning the memorial service. And I wrote her obituary, and I wrote her entire memorial service. And there's so many just little adulting things to do that you don't want to do, but you have to. And once that was all done and that quiet came in the house, that was a real struggle for me.
Was that one of the dark points?
That was definitely the dark point. It was, I would say, about a month after Libby died, that was my darkest.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
That was, I think because it was setting in, like, the PTSD with the accident and picturing things in my mind. Once everything got quiet and my boys went back to school, and once that all happened, I'm a teacher, and I was able to be off of work. I was off work for a month. And so towards the end of that month, I'd just be sitting at the house by myself, and there were so many thoughts of like, what's the point? Why even go on? Like, Libby was my light in my life. Like, I felt like I couldn't, and I didn't want to work my way through the pain. I just wanted it to end.
Yeah.
And especially in the car is a really bad spot for me. That is where I tend to have my most destructive thoughts, I would say.
Does that activate your grief or activate your tendency to think about not wanting to be here?
It does. It does, and it seems easy, and it's not as much now, but back in that really dark point, it was like every time I drove somewhere, I just kept picturing the truck hitting my son's car. And I just kept thinking how easy it would be to just run my car off the road, and just end it. And at one point I went to my daughter, the intersection where she died, people set up a little memorial for her on that corner. And it's really difficult for me to go there, but I went there one day, again, about a month after she died, and I was just sitting there, and all of these trucks kept going by on the road like super fast. And I had a moment where I scared myself, because I was just sitting there looking at this memorial and seeing all these trucks go by, and I walked down to the edge of the road, and I just was thinking like how easy it would be to just step in front of one of these trucks. And I was very, very close to the road, and I was thinking about walking out into the road, and a truck that was going by blew its horn and scared me. And I hopped back up onto the embankment, and I went back to my car, and I was just sobbing. And I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but I just started screaming F you, only not saying F, to every single truck that drove by. And that was my darkest moment, I would say. I just felt completely out of control, just screaming at these trucks like a crazy person.
Or like a person who's lost her daughter in an accident. Yeah.
So that was the point that scared me enough that I actually, I checked myself into a day program at a mental hospital, because I knew that, yes, everyone has dark thoughts, but that scared me enough that I was like, I need some extra help here.
So it was more than being tired of living. You were going into action or potential action. Yeah,
which
it's
is
good.
Exactly what I had read. When you start actually making plans like you're going to do something, that is when you need help. And I'm glad that I recognized that. It scared me enough that I was like, yeah, I need help. Like, this is verging on the not normal.
Yeah, and I'm glad that and I'm thankful to you that you are so open and authentic about that, because a lot of people that I have worked with share their either suicidal tendency, their suicidal thoughts, or their suicidal ideation. In my case, personal, I was very tired of living after my daughter and my mother died from suicide 4 months later. And I remember being so tired and thinking along the lines that you were, what's the point of this? Now, having had my mother die from suicide and I being the surviving daughter, I knew what the repercussions would be for my daughter and my family. And now, not saying that this is the reason why I didn't go into any action. I understand enough about my mother's suicide to understand that in that point of dying from suicide or attempting suicide, she had a few attempts of suicide. It's a different kind of mindset. So I do not want to make people feel guilty about wherever they are in the process, but I want to be clear. And I'm so grateful to you to make it clear to people to understand when is it time to ask for help and what kind of help. So tell us again, you went to a mental hospital, a day care facility?
Yep, it was a local like behavioral health hospital that we have here where I live. and they had full-time programs, but I just did the day program where I would go. It started at 8:00 in the morning and was done at 3 every day. And you would just do group classes and have individual counseling and things like that. But it was enough that it did show me, it gave me something to do every day, and just focusing on those emotions and how to deal with them was enough to help me know that I could be okay. And I didn't really want to do that. I have 2 boys that are still living, that I don't want to hurt them any more than they've already been hurt. So that's been kind of my saving grace there.
What would you say, what resource or insights from that time have helped you? And again, I want to say that you're sitting here with me and you're talking about it, and I've seen videos of you, how you share, and it shows resilience, and it's remarkable to, I would say, after 8 months, to be so proactive about it. So any resource or insight that you picked up that helped you come to where you are now, besides the bibliotherapy and learning about grief?
What really helped me during that time, that I think that I learned there, it was a lot of kind of guided meditation techniques. I know some people think this is weird, but I started listening to ASMR, which is where, I don't know if you know what it is, but you have the people kind of talking into your headphones, and it's just very soothing. And it took me out of my own head. Meditation, at first, until you kind of get used to it, you have trouble with the wandering thoughts. But I found with the ASMR, it would kind of calm me and then redirect those thoughts. Mm-hmm. So I found that extremely helpful, and I still listen to ASMR like almost daily. And that's sort of my way to relax and calm my mind before I fall asleep, or else my brain still wants to go to those negative thoughts.
And so for anyone listening, we're going to put those links to ASMR in the show notes so you can grab them there.
Oh, that would be great. So I tell people about it, and when they hear about it, they're like, oh, that sounds really weird. But I'm like, no, it's actually really helpful. And it helped me immensely, I think. And then the other thing, when I was in the program, they encouraged the journaling and the writing. And I was already doing that a little bit, but then it just became more focused. And as you know, I started my blog, my website called Grieving Mommy. And it was mostly just to share what I was going through. And it's like my therapy, and just getting everything out and telling people what I'm going through and what it's really like. And writing is like that outlet for me. And after that happened, it was interesting because I didn't think anyone would be reading it. And I'm like, who wants to read about something so depressing? But I had a lot of people contact me and just say how much they appreciated just kind of the raw honesty in what I was sharing. And I had some other grieving parents reach out to me and say, hey, this is really helpful for me, just knowing that someone else is going through the same thing. And, the whole people just saying, you're describing what I'm feeling like so perfectly. And that was really just what I needed. It was that idea of helping other people and also helping myself at the same time. And so I just sort of focused on that. And then along with that, my ex-husband and I started the nonprofit that we have in my daughter's honor. So that is called livelike.org. And we created that. She was a competitive dancer. So and her dance studio was like her second family. So we started that just to help other dancers. It's to help fund financially struggling dancers to take classes and be in competitions and things like that. And that I also tell people who are grieving is a great way to kind of focus your attention on the person that you've lost, is doing something in their name and in their honor.
Yeah, that's what I call creating meaning.
Yes, yeah. Definitely.
Now, what would be one thing I mean, given that your journey is specific in that there is multiple losses and also multiple traumatic, sudden losses, unprepared losses, early losses from your sister, to your father, your stepmom, to your daughter, only those that I've collected now. What would you want other grievers and healers or those supporting to know, like in supporting someone as early in their grief as you? What would be one thing that would be helpful for them?
For me, as far as people who have helped me, I really liked just kind of knowing what to expect and that it was okay to feel the way that I was. And just the people who said to me, I have a tendency personally to just, I want to be strong and I want to keep going and I want to find meaning in things. And I'm just like a go, go, go person. And the most helpful thing for me was people saying, like, slow down and breathe. Like, you need to feel this and not rush through it, not ignore it, not medicate it. Just, and I am on medication, so I have nothing against medication, but, as far as like, so many people turn to like alcohol or drugs or whatever, just to kind of numb the pain. And just the people saying like, you've been through a lot. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you have. Yeah.
To break down and take time and rest and all those things. That was the most helpful for me personally, which, I don't know if that would help other people. I know some people have trouble just getting off the sofa. I had trouble staying on the sofa. I wanted to busy myself to the point where, I was so busy. I didn't have time to think about things.
And I mean, just looking at the story that you were telling, that was sort of also required from you. I mean, you said just looking at the last loss of your dad in November, you were the caretaker. You had to run this. You had to organize that to support your stepmom. And then your stepmom died and you again had to caretake of everything. So it was sort of the pattern that you got into. Wow.
I've always been kind of like the people-pleasing, responsible person. And I can tell you, I still haven't grieved my parents properly.
Yeah.
And I know that.
Yeah. But it's also good to know that you have time, that, it's a saying that irks some people, but it still makes a point. It says grief is like dirty dishes in the sink. One day you'll wash them. And I mean, some people are really put off by the metaphor behind it, but the purpose is not to put people off, but to say, not time will heal wounds, but it's the time where it's okay to grieve. And that's not the same for everybody. I mean, in your case, Brooke, it takes a different rhythm for you to go into that. And that's okay too. So to end the podcast, given the time that we've all been speaking, as you know, I finish with a couple of sentence starters. Would it be okay to do that now?
Sure.
So grieving and trauma means?
I think it means hard work.
Yeah. And healing means?
Kind of along what I was saying, taking your time and feeling your feelings.
And that's probably a note to yourself as well, huh? Mm.
It is.
What I have learned about myself in the light of loss and trauma?
That one is that I am so much more resilient than I ever would have thought that I could be.
And one thing I wish people knew about loss and trauma?
That it changes you to your core and that you're never the same person. So I wish people would understand that and not expect you to be the same person you were before your loss and trauma.
Yeah, that's important to say because it really changes something in the brain, trauma specifically. And the last one is one specific thing that has changed since my loss and trauma or my losses that I wouldn't want to miss.
That is the knowledge of how amazing my daughter was. In her 10 short years, the amount of people that she impacted is remarkable. I'm still hearing new stories about her every day. She was a 1 in a million kid, and I know every parent says that. But something I wouldn't want to miss is the fact that I did get to learn how incredible she was and how one kind, joyous person can impact so many people.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for your time and honesty and the way you shared your intense story. And I'm glad that we can share those stories. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.